Welcome to the Evolved Caveman, where men learn to be successful and happy with your host, Dr. John Schinnerer, as he shares the most impactful ideas and practices for you to get the most from your relationships, your work, and from your life. Now here's Dr. John.
Hey, everybody, and welcome back to the latest episode of the Evolved Caveman. And today I am really thrilled and honored to have with me today my friend, Dr. Pelè Raymond. And Pelè is a best-selling author, musician, and host of the Profitable Happiness podcast. He was born and raised in a war-torn African refugee village, and he was named after Pelé of Brazil, the greatest soccer player ever and one of my heroes growing up. Dr. Pelè has experienced firsthand the struggle and victory of starting from humble beginnings to eventually live the American dream. As a young child watching bombs drop death and destruction all around his refugee village, Dr. Pelè remembers how his mother used the soothing power of songs and stories to make him happy, soften the pain of hunger, and chase away fear. Many years later, and halfway around the world, Dr. Pelè has repurposed his lifelong passion for music and storytelling toward the world of business, where he created Profitable Happiness, a signature process for helping people find success where happy meets purpose. Dr. Pelè is the author of 5 books, holds an MBA and Ph.D. in organization and management, and today he captures the attention of audiences around the world as a singer, songwriter, speaker, and podcast host. Pelè, thank you so much for coming in today. I really appreciate it. How you doing?
I'm doing very well. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Appreciate the invitation.
Sorry, I should call you Dr. Pelè. We've had this conversation.
Yeah, I'm going to keep calling you Dr. John, whether you like it or not.
It's so clunky. All right, so starting off, tell me a story of you at your very best. Tell me a story of you when you were struggling and then sort of overcoming that struggle.
Wow. That's like every day and like constant. but I think a story of struggle for me would have to be, one that I can think of right now would be the day that I got an email. I was a vice president of, I was a director of marketing, but I was corporate. So I think I felt like I was a vice president, but I was a director of technical marketing at a $1 billion company, $1 billion plus. And one day I got an email, and the email simply said, "You're fired," basically.
Oh.
And I just thought to myself, how does a person go from making multiple 6 figures to having this fancy title, director, vice president, walking around cool and really, thinking like you've arrived, and now you have nothing, no income, nothing. I had a young child and a wife at the time who's no longer my wife. We ended our relationship shortly after that, but I lost everything in one email. I think that led me to realize that I really wasn't those things that I thought I was. I wasn't those titles. I wasn't those, the nice Lexus I was driving back then. I wasn't any of those things because I had to give it back. So when you're thrown down to the floor and you don't know where your mortgage is coming from, you don't know. And this is 2002 that this happened.
Okay.
Company was EDS. EDS was Electronic Data Systems, Ross Perot's company. It was a huge, multi-billion-dollar company. And it was the end. But from that day forward, I decided I was never, ever going to put myself in other people's, at other people's mercy that way. I was going to go get educated. Mm-hmm. I was going to go put myself on a track where I could have some kind of autonomy. And so I went back, got my MBA, finished my PhD, and the rest is history. I'm safe now. But so I can tell you that.
Pardon me, tell me a little bit about how that made you feel as a man, like getting that email of "you're fired," because I think that has a huge impact on us, our identity, and then it can lead to certain feelings, certain ways.
Yeah, I think, it's all about how I set myself up. I set myself up to think I was those things. I really believed I was a director of marketing, gonna be VP in a couple of minutes. That's like who I thought I was. I'd get on airplanes, fly across the world, give speeches in France, Toulouse, France, I remember, Germany. I mean, I was like was a hot stuff, you know? And then what it does to you is that when you realize all of that was not true, then you say, well, what exactly is true? It's like, okay, so I'm nothing? Oh, I have to go and I have to sit down now and put together this thing called a resume, which is a bunch of lies. And I have to sit down in front of some people for an hour or half a day and tell more lies about how great I think I am so I can get back into that $200,000 a year bracket. That was just not going to work anymore for me. So I think when you hit the moment of truth, it's the best thing that can ever happen to you. And so I enjoyed how I felt after a while because I was like, you know what, at least whatever I have now, which is nothing, is the truth.
Well, I mean, because I've talked to a lot of men who are in that position, and and myself included, like I had an entrepreneurial venture, a company that did well and then crashed and burned when the economy tanked years ago. And I remember I got really depressed. So I don't know if you had that experience.
Yeah, I was definitely depressed for a while. My marriage ended.
Yeah, that hurts too.
I would like to say it was a result of that, but that's probably my ego.
I think it factors into it a lot of times.
Yeah, I would like to say that, well, that lady just didn't, all she wanted was my money. But that's not fair and it's not true. Mm-hmm. But a lot of things ended. My marriage ended, my job ended. And so, yeah, you start to wonder. But I am so grateful for that time because everything I have today, I have a wonderful family, 3 kids, wonderful wife. I have a great career, but everything I have, I own.
It can't be taken from you.
It cannot be because it is simply what I do. I am the person who's written my 6 books. I am the one who's written songs. I do play music, and I've enrolled music as a core part of what I do. It's not a hobby. So all of those things are now true. And whatever I have now is upside versus being afraid someone's going to fire me.
Right. Yeah. And so I think being grateful for those difficult experiences is a key to happiness in the sense that those difficult experiences propelled you to where you are now.
Absolutely.
So go back a little bit further for me, because one of the things that fascinates me about you is where you came from initially. Like the childhood experience you have or had is so foreign to me. So talk a little bit about that, if you would.
You know, I appreciate that. And we talked a little bit about that too. You know, I know that, now, Dr. John, you are actually born and bred in the US, right?
Yes, California.
Yeah. Now, I actually was born in Nigeria. And, I came here because my stepmother is from Minnesota. So I've lived in Minnesota like 35 years. But I was born in a war zone in Nigeria. Back in the 60s, there's this breakout tribe called the Igbos, my tribe. They created a country called Biafra, and they said they were going to break away. And so the war started, and millions of people were dying. Literally, it was probably one of the very first big African civil wars, even before Rwanda, before all the stuff we've heard. This was one of the first. And just imagine those children in the black and white pictures with the flies buzzing around their noses and their big stomachs suffering from kwashiorkor. That was the disease of the day. I was one of those kids. And it's fascinating that I survived it, and here we are. But what happened back then was that when the bombs were falling and we had no food, my father actually had left. He was in the US, and that's when he got married to my mom in Minnesota, my stepmom in Minnesota. But while we were, my biological mother and I were left there alone. And while we were struggling, my mother did the strangest thing. Because we had no food, she would sing about food, and she would tell stories about food, which is interesting because when I think back, it's like somehow singing about food kept us fed and kept us unafraid of dying and all these kinds of things. So, I know they say the trauma of your childhood can really do a lot for your life. I guess that's mine. I was running from refugee camp to refugee camp. Bombs were falling everywhere. But you know what? We were singing. And that's why I'm a musician today. That's why I write songs. Because for me, music was a healing thing at the age of 3 and 4 and so on. So in fact, if you look at my music, I don't write "Baby, I Love You" songs.
No pop. Okay.
Nope. I write songs about happiness.
Hmm.
I write songs about hope, and I have a song called "I Got Happy," which really that's my whole belief system is you are not happy, you have happy. It's something you claim, it's something you do. And so because my mom did that thing that made us happy, I've always realized that if I just do things that make me happy, I'm happy, period. No matter how much money I don't have and all the other things. So here we are today. I'm still writing songs. I'm using the music as part of my teaching people about happiness in corporations. And this whole idea of profitable happiness, which is my podcast and all the things I'm doing, it's all around the core idea that happiness is a skill we can develop. So that's how I became this guy who plays music, is because my mother sang songs because we didn't have food.
Well, thank you for sharing that. I appreciate it. So what's your belief around happiness in terms of, do you think happiness is sustainable all the time?
Yes, because there are different kinds of happiness, right? A lot of people confuse the word happiness with the one type of happiness that is very temporal and comes and goes. And that's sort of the extrinsic happiness, or the happiness that comes because you bought the new car. Mm-hmm. Or the happiness that comes because you got the new house, all the tricks. And that happiness, it goes up and then it falls. And it's like if you have a graph, it'll peak and then it'll just fall. And you got to fill it up again. It's like an addiction. You need more to keep it at peaks. That's not the kind of happiness that lasts. There's a lot of research around that too. It's the intrinsic happiness that comes from a sense of meaning, a sense of purpose that a person has. I mean, I don't know, you talked about having, been depressed when you lost something in your entrepreneurial journey. One of the things you lost was meaning. Mm-hmm. You lost a sense of, what the heck am I doing with myself? Like, why is it, what's it all for? And that lack of meaning, that's your happiness running away from you. So when we can intentionally hold on to meaning and purpose and really feel like we have a tangible reason for why we do what we do, and it's important not only to ourselves but to others, that's the root of real happiness. So when you combine the sort of extrinsic and the intrinsic happiness, now you got a story that can last.
Yeah, it's interesting. While you were talking, I was thinking that when I got separated from my wife and eventually divorced, I went through a depression there as well. Felt like a failure as a father, as a man, as a husband. But I had my work, and my work I find highly meaningful. So even when I was struggling at times, I could still go to work and my work would fill me up. So that to me is that intrinsic happiness that you're talking about.
Absolutely.
So tell me about the 5 brain-based principles for reducing stress and raising success in life and work from your book, I Got Happy. Mm-hmm.
So first of all, everybody's got to have a 12-step program or a 4-step process or a 5. So this is mine. Okay. I'm going with the flow here, but I thought, wait, nobody's put the words HAPPY into a process. I mean, we just got to stuff the words, take your research and all the things you've experienced and make it work, because people will remember happy. They won't remember some other acronym. And so I really believe in simplicity. And when we talk about caveman, right? Mm-hmm. We need simple to communicate. So that's why I created my acronym around actually 2 words, hard and happy. And I'll share that with you right now. So the whole idea of, people say life is hard. That's like a thing. Oh, my life is hard. And, I realized the story we're telling ourselves, right, is so destructive that one of the first things you got to do if you want to get on the path to intrinsic as well as extrinsic happiness is you got to change the story you tell yourself. You got to be able to debate with yourself about what yourself is telling you. Because if you can't do that, that skill of being able to talk back at yourself and convince yourself that you're wrong at that negative pessimism you're feeling, if you can't do that, you're going to struggle with ever being happy. So I developed this thing called, no, life is not hard. Life is how adversity reveals destiny. HARD. Okay. Now, what is that? It's a tool. It's a tool for talking back at yourself. When something goes wrong, you say, okay, what happened? H, right? What's the problem? What happened? Yeah, somebody fired me. Okay, got it. So how does that adversity affect you? A, okay. Well, write down 4, 5 ways that adversity affects you. Because when you write things down and take them outside of your mind and put them on paper, it begins to become a thing in the universe, if you will, to be very simplistic. Adversity. Okay, good. What does that adversity and how, the thing that happened, what does that reveal to you? What are the lessons to be learned? And then what are you going to do about it? That's your HARD. So this is a process that you use to question your mind. When things go wrong, when you face adversity, you don't just go, oh, the world is over. You say, nope, okay, let's start from the first one. What happened? Okay, let's write it down. What does that really mean? What was revealed? And what am I going to do to create my destiny?
Yeah, Dr. Pillai, I love that. I mean, it reminds me of the when one door closes exercise in positive psychology. And, it's when one door closes, another door opens. And so I think these are skills that we need to practice over and over and over so that we can begin to do them automatically as we go through life. And I think, to your point, I think some of these things are big things like getting fired or getting divorced. Some of these things are little things like, I don't know, getting a door ding in your car. But the process is the same. And I think the really important processes to getting towards greater happiness.
Yeah, absolutely. And you use the key word there, which is practice.
Mm-hmm.
I think we covered this a little bit when we first started talking about the importance of practice to both of us. Pelè was a hero of yours, and I was named after him. And the thing I learned about Pelè is the word practice. I shared with you the story of how during that same war where we were running to try to survive, back in the 60s, Pelè and his team, Brazil, had just beaten the whole world again in soccer for the second time in a row, I think it was. And so he decided, hey, I'm going to go on a world tour, an exhibition match. And one of the places he decided to go and play soccer as an exhibition was Nigeria. But they were in a war. They were killing each other. Millions of people were dying. But you want to know how powerful Pelè was? He was so powerful that he said, no, I want to go there. And then the country said, okay, fine. We'll stop fighting for 48 hours so that you can come and play safely and go away. And this was written in Time magazine at that time. It's actually, you can Google it and see this story just to show you the power of this man. And when he was asked, why are you so great? What makes you so successful at soccer or anything else? He said, everything is practice. That's in quotes. Everything is practice. So for me, before I read the talent code, we talked about that too. Before I read all the books, the science of myelin and how the neural networks connect and when you're, muscle memory, I learned right from Pelè, because my father gave me that name because of his greatness. I learned from Pelè that there's nothing I cannot do if I can put in the practice. So you're right. Practice translates into happiness, translates into workplace wellness, all the things we teach.
Can I jump in there? Because one of the things, this brings up to me the idea of placebo versus nocebo, that, placebo is if you believe something's going to help you, it'll help you. Nocebo, if you believe it's not going to help you, it's not going to help you. And one of the things I see with depressed clients is they don't believe any of this is going to help them. And so they don't put in the practice and they don't get the benefits.
That's right.
And so part of it to me, I'm always talking about mindset and, growth mindset versus fixed mindset, but you have to adopt the mindset at the beginning that practicing these skills can and will help you.
They will, because your mind will adapt. Your all the neural networks will fire and to keep you alive so that you don't freeze in the cave or get eaten by the lion. Your mind will change to become the things you practice. But if you don't practice those things, they'll never come. So I believe that this thing we call happiness is not something we wait to feel. It's something we do.
We build, we create.
We build it, we create it, we make it happen.
And part of that's because our minds weren't created to be happy. They weren't created to make us happy. They were created for survival. And so we've got to fight that negativity bias. We've got to find ways to counter that in order to be happy if we truly want to be happy.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, what I teach in corporations, beyond the assessments that we do first to find out how the culture is doing and how employees are faring and all those kinds of things, I have a basic 5-step process that is HAPPY. And it is something that is intended to change or adapt cultures, is to sort of help everyone form a culture of practice, a community of practice, if you will. If we all do the same kind of things, we have the same beliefs and behaviors, before you know it, we have a new culture. That's the idea. So what does HAPPY stand for? It stands for every day recognize as an employee, as a leader, that it's all in your head. Anything that's happening is created in your head, destroyed in your head, influenced in your head. And if you just simply decide you're not going to accept the world as you see it, then that's the truth. Mm-hmm. So you do have choice. You do have the ability to say, you know what? If I'm more heedful, mindful, and focused, I can actually decide what's true and what I'm going to throw away. So it's all in your head. So deal with the world knowing that you have the power of your mind.
Yeah, I like that question of what's the story you're telling yourself at the moment.
Yeah, exactly.
We create a lot of stories in our head about everything.
Absolutely.
Sometimes the stories are accurate and sometimes they're complete fiction.
Yeah. And then the A stands for, awareness. I can't tell you how much most of us walk around like ostriches. In fact, I have something in the book. I don't know if you can see that book. It's called The 3 Gaps Between Goals and Greatness. Mm-hmm. This book here, this is my 3rd book, I believe. The 3 Gaps Between Goals and Greatness. I really made a big deal about this idea of awareness, because awareness is an ostrich puts its head in the sand and forgets that there's a lion coming around, right? Just because your head in the sand doesn't mean that the lion is not near you. Those things did not change just because you put your head in the sand. Mm-hmm. And that's what we do when we are not aware of our blind spots, our derailers, the things that destroy us. Like, we need to do an assessment, not just of our strengths. Everybody talks about, just do your strengths. Yeah, that's good. But the things that derail you are intertwined with your strengths very, very, very strongly, if that's the way of describing it. So you got to be aware of the things that can derail you and pull your head out of the sand and be aware of that lion as it's coming.
Awareness is that foundational skill. Without awareness, you've got nothing, because if you're not aware of your shortcomings, you can't change them. And it's interesting, there's recent research by Tisha Urich who found that 95% of us think we are self-aware, and in truth, it's about 10%. So just let that sink in for a second.
Absolutely.
Oh, God, that's
absolutely
nuts.
It took me, I had to go through a lot of training and learning to finally figure out that I have certain derailers
blind
that
spot.
are different from yours, different from someone else's. But if you don't know what those are, you got to know your strengths, but you also need to know your derailers so that you can strategically sort of, survive.
So what would you say, to what extent is mindfulness or meditation a part of that, and becoming more aware of our internal landscape, the thoughts and feelings that we have?
That's part of the first thing, H. It's all in your head. I call it heedfulness. Heedfulness is like mindfulness, but it's just a word that has an H. Okay, I have to start. I'm not going to start with mindfulness. I need my H. So heedfulness. Let's go. Yeah. There you go. So you got heedfulness. You got awareness, which is awareness of both your strengths and your derailers, which is the one a lot of people forget. And then you need a sense of purpose. An organization is a soul. An organization is a being. And if it doesn't communicate its purpose well to the leaders and the employees and everyone around, then everybody's just doing their own purpose. Mm-hmm. So, because I serve organizations, I want to help them clarify what exactly is your purpose and your vision and your mission. And let's make sure that's communicated. So the sales guy down the street is saying exactly what the sales guy on the other side of the street is saying, and so on and so forth. So purpose needs to be very much something that is communicated all the time. Everybody has to feel like we have a purpose. And the second P is practice, which gets back to our conversation. Now that you're aware of yourself, you got the whole know thyself thing happening. Now that you have mindfulness and strategies for I don't know, meditation and so on, if that's something you do, whatever helps you be heedful or mindful, you got that. And now that you know the purpose of the organization and your own purpose as well, because a lot of people, I think, are in the wrong purpose. I think that I wouldn't have a problem working at a corporation if they would let me bring my guitar. Okay, because that's part of my purpose. So, hey, we all have our thing, and you got to know what yours is. So now it's time to practice. And what do you practice? It's what we talked about earlier. You practice the skill of happiness. There are many different things that you do that make you happy, bring you into that flow, as it's described, that zone where time flies away and you are just so lost in the perfection of what you're doing. As you said, when you were doing your entrepreneurial work, and it filled you. It had meaning. So you practice those things. You actually do them over and over to keep yourself positive. And then the last one is you. It's all up to you. It's all. I kind of use this as like my. This is not about the world. Don't blame anybody. This is about you. And if you are okay, the world is okay. But just know that it all comes back to you. Buck stops.
So if I can recount those, it's is head or heedful?
Heedfulness. It's all in your head.
Awareness.
Yep. Awareness.
Purpose. He is practice, and Y is you. So the purpose to me is that there seems to be a corporate purpose, and then is there a personal purpose or meaning as well?
Yeah, but both an individual and a group or team purpose. Yeah.
To me, when working with corporations and individuals, it seems like the ideal is when the individual's purpose or meaning has some overlap with the corporation's purpose or meaning.
Or at worst is not in conflict with it.
Right. And then the you seems to be, there's an element of personal responsibility in that. Yeah.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. It's all up to you. And, all of this for me boils down to behavior, habits, and a sense of community. And that's actually what I focused on when that was my little thing in this book. Everything we do boils down to our behaviors. And if we have to be intentional that those behaviors come from our strengths and from avoiding our derailers. And then we have to build habits of success from, those behaviors. And then
success habits of happiness too.
Yeah, exactly. And then be part of a community, share that within a community. That's the best way to do anything, is to be part of a community.
So one of the things, you were talking about extrinsic versus intrinsic happiness. And, in terms of extrinsic happiness, where we get our a feeling of positive emotion from like purchasing a car, one of the things that made me think of is that idea of the hedonic treadmill, which is, for those that don't know, Pelè, you're shaking your head.
Yeah.
The hedonic treadmill is where we get accustomed or habituated to anything. Like we can get used to winning the lottery, or we can get used to being a prisoner in a concentration camp, and anything in between. So when we purchase a new car, like let's say you get a hot new BMW, for a few weeks, you got a little swagger in your step, feel good about yourself, you have some confidence, you're happier. Yeah. But as soon as you start to take that car for granted, which might be 6, 8, 12 weeks out, it doesn't add anything to your life satisfaction. And that's what Dr. Pillai, you were talking about, when we get to that point of the external doesn't make us happy anymore. So we need to find another fix for that.
And when we talked about practicing happiness, and I didn't want to go into too much detail, but one of the things you practice is gratitude.
Exactly. Tell us about that, because that's a big one.
Yeah. So practicing gratitude. I like your analysis, or not analysis, your analogy using the car. I'm going to use one that's a little bit scary and racy, but this is the caveman.
Yes, definitely.
So I'm going to go there. How about a wife? When you first get married, the happiness is like woo up here, right? And then the ring's on the finger and time goes by. And now it's like, hey, where's the excitement that we used to have or all these things? And that's where intentional practice of gratitude can keep you up there, right? It's
Tell us how.
Well, I mean, hey, look, okay, maybe I shouldn't keep using this analogy. maybe let's go back to the car analogy.
Well, I think it has to do with, looking for little things that are different day in and day out. So,
yes.
I think that, at first you're like, wow, my wife's sexy. She's beautiful. She's smart. And, I'm attracted to her physically and I love having conversations with her. But you have to go beyond that and deeper and look for little tiny things like,
yes,
wow, I really appreciate it when she empties the dishwasher, or I really like it when she wears that color lipstick, or I really like it when we have this deep, meaningful conversation about, I don't know.
Yeah, I hear you. My wife is my best friend. She's like my soulmate. And one of the things we try to do almost every night is lights are off, everybody's tired, about to go to sleep, and we ask the question, grateful for? That's the question.
Mm-hmm.
Grateful for? And so she'll go and I'll go, and we list 1 to 3 things that we are grateful for that day or that period of time. And I always include something that has to do with her.
Mm-hmm.
And it's that's how you keep the happiness that you had. I mean, we've been married 15 years now, and I am happier now about my marriage than 15 years ago. And this is my second marriage. My last marriage.
Yeah. Well, and I like that idea that we have two buckets of emotion, one positive, one negative.
Yep.
And if we're not aware of it, one of the ways that marriages end is death by 1,000 paper cuts. And that's the most common way that they end.
Yeah.
And so that negative bucket gets filled with little tiny drops of resentment and hurt, being ignored, pain. And, the more that gets filled, I think the more our perception of our loved one goes from all positive to all negative. And when our perception gets to all negative, we got trouble, because I've seen couples that are in a place where, the husband brings home flowers for his wife, and the wife can't even accept that as a kind act. She's like, those are just going to die. Why did you get the flowers?
Yeah.
Like, you're in trouble at that point.
Yeah.
And so to focus on gratitude and appreciation, small things, often to put little drops in the positive bucket in an intentional and meaningful way daily is huge. It cannot be overstated.
Yeah. No, I'm not the expert on marriages, but I'm very lucky, because one of the things I know works is to actually know what your spouse appreciates.
Mm-hmm.
I happen to be lucky that I know exactly what she appreciates. I know what she doesn't care about flowers. My wife is not one of those, I come down with bended knee and I've got the flower and it's nice and red. And she's not impressed by any of that.
What is she impressed by? What does she love?
She actually, okay. Reiki, if you're listening to this, don't come down too hard on me on this. My wife likes to be appreciated.
Mm-hmm.
That's the big thing for her, is she does so much in terms of the kids and the house and she just wants to recognize from the things you say and do that she's being appreciated. That's it. Very simple. There's not much more that impresses her. The flowers and all the physical forms of appreciation, they don't work. She has to feel it. It has to be based on the laughter and the conversation and the attention. That's what she connects with. She also, and this is unique to my wife, I think, she also likes to be left alone, because she loves to read. She loves to be, she likes to be in her own creative space sometimes. And so silence is actually okay with her. It's not with me, by the way. I'm a talker. I gotta be, I'm on, we're talking. But for her, she needs silence sometimes.
So you're more extroverted, she's more introverted.
Yeah, but although she can switch in front of people, she becomes
right. I mean, being an introvert doesn't mean you can't be extroverted.
Yeah.
It means you get your energy from being alone or one-on-one.
Exactly.
We introverts need our silence, our alone time.
Yeah. So just from those two examples, I'm lucky because I figured those things out, and I'm able to give her those things, like the time and the freedom to be creative and and the appreciation, because it's real. I don't really have to put that on. It's just, I really appreciate her, and it always shows. So that's kind of where I'm at with.
I think those work really well. Yeah. So shifting gears a little bit, can you, and I don't know that you go back far enough in your Nigeria experience to comment on this, but can you talk a little bit about the differences in masculinity from Nigeria to here?
Oh, yes, I can, because...
Are there any differences?
Oh, yes. Let me just say I'm a recovering chauvinist.
Okay.
I'm putting that on the table. I've already explained here in all transparency that I got a divorce, and I believe that the person I was back then was very much the Nigerian model of what a man is, which is, I'm the provider. I'm the one who has all the money. Keep quiet. Go and cook in the kitchen. Don't talk to me. That's my African accent.
Yeah, and that's also the way that we're socialized, right? That
yes,
in America, that's how we're socialized, I would argue. And some people are going to argue with that, but I do think that that's the traditional, stereotypical model of masculinity.
But here in America, okay, and this is back to your question about what's the difference. Mm-hmm. Here in America, there has been a very strong movement to recognize equality and appreciate it, and so on and so forth. There has not been that movement yet at that scale where I come from back in Nigeria. And so coming to America, I had a lot of that in me, the sense that I am the man and I must produce the money. And just all these things. And I'm sure it showed in the way I spoke and in the reactions I got. My ex-wife was also from Nigeria. So she went along with it. She bought into it. But when she came to America, everything changed, because she was like, hey, I don't have to be like that. I think that played into that. My current wife is actually also from Nigeria, but she was born here. And she has none of that in her system. She's like, so I've grown out of that. I don't look at myself as anything other than a spousal unit. She's the other spousal unit. Equal.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I think that stereotypical model of masculinity can create problems for us down the road when we get into a long-term relationship or a marriage, because I think it breeds contempt, where, one feels they are above the other and is looking down at the other. And contempt is kind of anger with a judgment attached to it. Like, I know better than you. You should do what I say.
Yep.
And we know from research that that's one of the hallmarks of divorce. It's one of the harbingers. So, there's criticism, stonewalling, defensiveness, and contempt. So it's, I think in many ways that traditional stereotypical model of masculinity already kind of sets us out to fail in relationships.
It's very dangerous. It really is. Because here's another aspect to this whole thing. Some of us really aren't masculine that way. Mm-hmm. We're putting it on. I mean, look at me. I'm a songwriter. Okay, I cry when I write songs, John. Come on. I'm not your most let us go and destroy the world kind of a guy,
You can be, I would argue, you can be masculine and still feel things. Like when I was growing up, I felt things deeply, and I thought I was the only one who did, the only man who did, or young man.
Yeah.
But in talking with men for 20 plus years, like 95% of the men I talked to are exactly the same way. I had no idea.
Yeah. I just know now that I go with my feelings, my true myself. And I try not to put on the male persona that I know I used to. I definitely used to do it. I judged myself by my car in a big way, and my things.
Yeah.
And then the wife was an acquisition back then. She wasn't a partner.
Yeah. And I really like the idea of just allowing men to be whatever they are, whoever they are. Like the idea of hundreds of different types of masculinities and just allowing guys to be that, rather than we police ourselves a lot as men. Stop being such a pussy, don't be a fag, all those kind of put downs that we use to get each other to jump back in that man box. And I think the more that we can allow other men to just be who they are rather than trying to get them to behave as we think they should behave.
Yeah. And if anybody thinks that it's easy to change, it takes years.
Mm-hmm.
For example, coming from a person who felt like I needed to be the provider to getting divorced in that situation and then meeting a woman who didn't need me for anything. Like she was completely self-contained, needed nothing from me. Like that took a while to figure out, how do I impress her?
Well, and I think that's true for all of us. Like it takes us years. And that's why I named my podcast The Evolved Caveman, is because I think we are on a journey to evolve and learn better ways of being, better ways of communicating, better ways of relating to others.
Yeah. And if you take it for granted and don't realize that it takes work to actually evolve, as you say, it might surprise you.
Yeah. It was funny. I was interviewing a guest a while back and he kept referring to himself as the evolving caveman. And I was like, oh, shit.
Yeah, that would have been another title for you, right?
That was so much better. Because evolved indicates that, like, I'm done. I'm there, which we're never there. So, can't rebrand now, too late. But
yeah. No, actually, that's not true. You can rebrand.
Yeah.
I just rebranded, like, in the last few months. I've gone from I got happy to the profitable happiness. I don't think anybody notices too much. You can rebrand.
I'm sure it's just a pain in the ass. Seems like a lot of work.
Yeah.
So shifting gears, and thank you for sharing all that. I really appreciate the honesty. How did you get into positive psychology initially? Why did you get into it?
My Ph.D. was in organization and management. And, I'm going to try to keep this simple without getting too complicated. But organization and management has a fundamental problem, in my opinion. It focuses too much on the negative aspects of people, the behavior modification required to make people better. It's like a therapy-based thing. And so when I first walked off of that, out of that world and went into practice as an executive coach, that's what we did. We would assess people, tell them what was wrong with them. We're talking about,
better.
Yeah, right. We're talking about, successful VPs in big companies, and then we basically work with them for a year to try to fix them. And I didn't find that was a successful model for me. It wasn't working. Something wasn't right. And so I started reading about positive psychology as a result of that. And I was fascinated that there's this other movement it's younger, right? It doesn't come from the Freud and Jung world of psychology. It comes from the newer folks who, even Maslow. Actually, Maslow was the first person to talk about positive psychology.
Right. It started with the humanistic psychology movement, but they didn't believe in research, which is fascinating. So it took positive psych to bring the research piece in.
Yeah. And so I was so happy to discover that there are people who aren't focusing on just the negative. They're focusing on what's great about you and how can we make that better. Mm-hmm. And I just, being a songwriter and the things that happiness did for me at a very young age, that was definitely the lane I wanted to be in. I wanted to be the guy who said, hey, let's talk about happiness, right? I get it that you have problems, you have derailers, but let's focus on how can you sustain a happiness culture, because that's what produces profit. I mean, there's a lot of research around that too. Bill Gates once said that one of his success traits is that he's always afraid of failure. And that he basically runs around and he's just trying to avoid failure. And hey, it worked for him. He's the richest man in the world, I think, as of last week again. I'm not sure if he's changed places with Bezos. But so it works, right? It worked for him. But I do not believe it works for most of us to go around thinking of only the negative things in our lives.
Well, and one of the things I loved about positive psych is when I was training at Cal, like traditional psychology for 100 years has been focused on how we're broken and how do we fix that. So how do we get from -5 to 0?
Exactly.
And if we got a client from -5 to 0, we win. Like that's success, right?
Yep.
Positive psychology came along and said, well, how about if we focus on strengths and positive emotion and meaning and purpose? And their purpose was to get from 0 to +5.
Yeah.
So now I had these tools to help people get from -5 to +5. And, not everyone can do that, but it's such a better goal.
Yeah. Yeah. I remember taking an assessment test, a behavioral personal values test called the Berkman. I don't know if you've ever heard of okay, you've heard of Berkman. Okay. I took that about 6 or 7 years ago. And for me, the music, they have one of their, one of their measurables is is music, actually. Mine was off the chart. Like, it wasn't even on that. It was just, I remember people asking me, why aren't you like a musician? I'm like, I am, but why aren't you doing something with that? Because this is who you are. And to your point about the positive thing, music it's like such a happy place for me.
It fills you up. Yeah.
It fills me up. And it doesn't necessarily do that for everyone. Okay. We all have our different, can I just call it the happy place just for this conversation? We all have different things that do that for us. But once you discover it, you're golden. And I can tell you, look, I'm not necessarily a multi-gazillionaire and all those things, but I'm literally living the dream because I got my music. I got my family and all those things. But when I crawl into my little, I have a man cave. It's a music studio, by the way. When I crawl in, I can play my instruments. I am in my own heaven. That's it. So I think if we want to be very successful and productive, we have to find those things that really energize us and put them into what we do to create our success in life. That's the best success that you'll ever find, is the one that involves the thing that truly makes you happy.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. That idea of what energizes you, what fills you up. And I think, one of the things I've thought about over the years is it seems for a lot of people, it comes down to serving others. And I know that some men pursue wealth and power. I don't think that, I think that's a path. It's a misguided path to happiness. I mean, maybe you get wealthy and powerful doing that, but I don't think it makes you happy. I do think that serving others seems to be one of the surest routes to it. And I think there's other ones like playing music but I think it's the activities that get us outside our own head, outside of thinking about ourselves, that really, really have a huge benefit for us.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And, I have kind of a double thing. Music is actually my form of teaching. I'm actually a teacher. I just use music as one of my flavors. And so to your point, when you teach, you're serving, you're serving other people. You're helping other people go from A to B.
Right. And I do think it's important for those of us in serving professions to focus on self-care also, because I can, your comment makes me think of teachers in public schools and how they get tapped out, burned out, stressed out. And I think that's because they just keep giving and giving and giving, and people keep taking and taking and taking, and they forget to focus on taking care of themselves. So at a certain point, they have nothing left to give. And that's where you get burnout, I believe. Yeah, absolutely. So I don't know if you can go here, but one of the things I was curious about you is what were some of the formative experiences where you learned what it is to, quote, be a man?
Boy.
That's not an easy question.
That's not an easy question at all. But I welcome, I'm a lifelong learner like you, John. And so for me, maybe I'm going to learn something. Maybe I don't have a great answer. I can learn from you. But I think that my father was the one I looked to, and I said, yeah, that's a man, And my father was a strong person. He was very bad with interpersonal relationships. He insulted people. He didn't know how to get along with people. It was his way or the highway. And unfortunately, I learned all those lessons and thought they were great. And I really struggled in the corporate world when I realized, wait a second, This is not how to be successful. I learned that from a man I was trying to become like. So I had to actually let go of what I thought a man was. I've now come to agree with myself that, yeah, I kind of had to let go of that. But I've come to agree with myself that a man just is. I don't really know that there's anything that makes me a man or a woman anymore. I think you're just here. I don't feel that rings true. I just feel like I don't judge myself too much anymore along the values of strength and I am the leader. These are the things I got from looking at my dad, and I don't buy those things anymore. I think that we've evolved beyond that. I'm using your words now, evolved. But what's your? Because as I said, I don't know a great answer for that from me. What's your? Maybe I can learn from you.
Well, I think in thinking about it, definitely my dad, and my dad was brilliant. He was a great dentist and a great businessman. Mm-hmm. And I remember being angry with him in my early 20s because I think that he didn't have much time. He worked a lot. He was gone a lot. And so there was a period in my life where I was angry that he wasn't around much. And I think that one of his shortcomings is he wasn't fantastic in terms of emotional awareness, emotional intelligence. And I had to remind myself, or I guess learn, that wasn't expected of a man back then. He did everything that was expected of him as a good husband, a good father, a good man, right? He was a good provider. He was there. He did not cheat. He didn't drink too much. He did everything that was expected of him. He was just a good man. But I think the expectation of a good man and a good husband has evolved greatly in the past 50 years. So I think that the other places I learned were from some of my coaches in soccer and water polo and swimming, but I'm not sure those were always good lessons. Yeah. Some were not very bright. Some were alcoholics. Some were mean and aggressive, unnecessarily so. Yep. I think I learned from my peers. And I think there was a lot of lessons that I needed to unlearn.
Yeah. Excuse me.
Yeah.
Blow my nose.
Yeah. So I don't know. I mean, I think that in many ways I was growing up around a lot of men who just did, just took what was given to them without question in terms of what does it mean to be a man.
Yeah.
And again, that's part of why I'm doing the podcast, is just to look at what parts of masculinity do we want to hold on to and what parts do we want to let go of?
I now as I'm listening to you, I have another place where I learned about being a man. I'm not sure I learned the best lessons there either. It's interesting. The pattern here is our fathers both didn't have the greatest emotional intelligence, and we learned and had to maybe unlearn some things. But I also learned about being a man from friends and colleagues over time. And it was terrible. It was brutal. I remember one friend of mine, when I was younger, he said, Pelè, you're going to be you're going to be like your dad. Because my dad was a professor, a doctor, Dr. Frank. You're going to be like your dad. You're going to be this really smart guy who writes books, and you're not going to make any money. Me, on the other hand, I'm going to make a lot of money and I'm going to be very successful. Let's take a look at 30, 40 years later. That guy is a mogul. Mm-hmm. He is very successful. He's in Nigeria. I'll say his name, Paul. My friend Paul Awanibe. He told me that, and he turned out to be a mogul. He is very successful financially. And guess what? He's right. I'm a guy who writes 6 books and all these things. But what he did to me then was he crushed me, because I spent a lifetime trying to be like him. And I should never have done that, because I'm not like him.
Yeah.
I am the guy who writes songs, and I am the guy who teaches about happiness. I'm not the guy who runs a multi-billion-dollar company in Africa. So
do you want to be?
I don't want to be anymore. I wanted to be passionately 20 years ago. And so I learned these lessons about manhood from my friends like Paul, and they weren't the right lessons. So it's almost like I feel if I am to be called a man now, then it's because I've unlearned everything I thought a man was.
And then I think are comfortable in your own skin afterwards.
Yeah. Yeah. It's been
sorry, it makes me think that, I think one of the biggest lessons we take away from this is man is supposed to be provider. We're supposed to provide for our family. And if we really internalize that, then what does that mean? It means that our primary values would be something like wealth and success. But I can't tell you how many men I've seen that have pursued those values to the age of 50 plus, and they come to me and they say, I'm miserable.
Yeah.
So they've succeeded, like they bought the pipe dream.
Yes.
And I get, that value started out as something good. I'm going to provide for my family. And over 30 years, it gets distorted. And, the men just aren't there for their wives. They aren't there for their children. And so then they get resentment and anger from the home. And then they don't have happiness and success. They have success and work.
Yeah. Yeah. I couldn't agree more. Probably the definition of a man is the man who is aware of who he truly is and is not trying to be any other man. Part of the reason I brought up the friends thing is because I was very much affected by what my friends were doing, their successes. I wanted their successes.
Yeah, and I see that a lot in my 20-something clients. It kills them that they're not making as much money and having these wild experiences like skiing in the French Alps.
Yeah.
And so again, by comparison, they feel lousy.
Yeah. And that's, I think maybe becoming a man is unlearning all the wrong lessons that you thought becoming a man was about when you were younger.
I like that.
Yeah.
And, I remember I have a friend that said, well, I haven't really listened to your podcast, but my assumption is that you're pushing these, 20-something wimpy millennials who don't have any vestige of masculinity as the new masculine. And I'm like, well, that's an assumption.
Yeah.
That's not true. Like, I'm all for physical strength. I'm all for men learning to be assertive rather than aggressive. I'm all for men learning to be confident. I'm all for a lot of traditional masculinity. I just think that there's other things that we need to learn in order to improve ourselves and evolve. Things like emotional intelligence, things like good communication skills, things like respect for women. I mean, there's things that would benefit us to, as you said, unlearn and learn.
Yeah, absolutely. I do feel good about, my kids, when my kids feel like, when they call me dad, I know maybe this is trite, but believe it or not, I feel like that's a big deal because I earned that.
Mm-hmm.
They don't have to call me anything, but they really, I am the man in their life.
Yeah. And I think that's hugely important to be a good role model for your kids. What do you want to model for them? How do you want them to see what a relationship should look like?
Absolutely. Yeah. And they see me being wrong a lot around mom. Oh, yeah, your mom's right. I'm wrong. Sorry. And you know what? At some point, but my father never did that.
That's a really good lesson.
Yeah. Back in my father's days, there was no such thing as him being less than perfect at all times, or it's like, but with I'm the goofy guy around here. Like my wife is the one who actually knows anything. I'm the one who, I don't know what you're talking about, guys. Bye. But
on that point, I think one of the things that I've strived for is to have a sense of humor and to take myself less seriously.
Yes.
Which makes it far more fun and happy-go-lucky for everyone around me. Like, it's just more enjoyable.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, I think we've reached the end of this conversation, and I got to say, Dr. Pillai, I really appreciate, your honesty, your vulnerability. I love the information that you've shared today. Is there anything that you want to add at the end of this conversation here?
Well, the only thing is, maybe with your permission, I'll put a plug to the fact that, I am someone who wants to serve organizations. And by bringing my message of happiness and, the fact that happiness can be profitable to companies, and it's not just a fun, nice to have thing. It actually leads to cultures that lead to companies that have customers that are happy. All of that. There's a big link.
Mm-hmm.
So, anyone who's a corporation that wants a speaker to come and play some guitar and talk about happiness, I'm the guy. So that'll be my plug.
How do they get in touch with you?
The best way is drpillai.com, drpele.com. I'm also on LinkedIn, but I think, those two sources.
Okay. Yeah, and absolutely. You have my blessing for that plug.
Okay, thanks.
And yeah, actually, there was a study that just came out that showed that call center operators in a positive mood successfully closed more sales than those in a slightly negative mood. That was just one of the recent research studies.
Yeah, and there's lots of studies like that. Yeah,
more and more coming out. Yeah, which is fantastic. Yeah. So again, thank you so much for your time, Dr. Pillai. I love our conversations. I just love your energy.
Likewise. And this is the second one because you were on my podcast and we had a blast too. So thank you so much.
We may have to do some more because these are just great.
All right.
All right. So thank you so much. And that does it for this episode of The Evolved Caveman. Thanks so much. Be sure to rate, review on Apple iTunes.
Thank you for listening to the Evolved Caveman podcast. If you like what you've heard, support us by subscribing, leaving reviews, and sharing the podcast with friends and colleagues. For the latest, most powerful tools to connect with like-minded men, join the Facebook group at The Evolved Caveman. Follow Dr. John on Instagram at The Evolved Caveman, all one word, or join the email list by visiting guidetoself.com.